The movie begins with Brian and Kiera Woods relocating to their new house with their kids, Ellie and Steven. While Steven is in awe of the big house, Ellie despises the idea of relocating. Ellie feels she'll miss everyone from the old neighborhood and wonders why her parents are making her move. Upon arrival, Ellie comments that the house is very ugly. Ellie enters the house and she sees the painting of the previous owner of the house with a very weird hand sign. She complains about the strange painting to Kiera, who says it's part of the house and they'll get rid of most of the odd stuff eventually. But Brian shows Steven his room, while Kiera shows Ellie hers. Ellie's nonchalant attitude persists, despite her mother's attempt to convince her that she's making decisions on her behalf. Brian also takes Ellie to the reading room, but Ellie isn't interested and she walks away. Meanwhile, a door catches Ellie's attention, and her parents tell her it is the door to the cellar. She goes nearer to the door and opens it. She enters and the door locks by itself. Panicked, she knocks on the door asking her parents to open it, but they struggle to do so. She starts hearing some wind whistling in the cellar and she gets very scared. She feels more frightened and knocks on the door repeatedly. Eventually, the door opens and she angrily walks to her room, firmly saying that she won't stay in that house. Later, Kiera comes to tell Ellie that they have an urgent meeting at work that night and they would need her to take care of Steven. She's upset they're alone on their first night in a strange, large house, but she has no choice. That night, she calls her friend and speaks about the horrible relocation idea. Suddenly, Steven comes to scare her with a weird mask he found in the house. She warns him to stop and calls her mother to complain about Steven being a nuisance. Kiera then commands Steven to go to bed, but before that, Ellie asks where Steven found the mask, to which he responds, "It's from an old storage room with all the antique items." Steven tells her he heard from his classmate that the building belonged to a witch who made a pact with the devil. They find a phonograph which gets them curious and decide to play it. They listen to the man reading some mathematical formulas, and he starts counting from 1. The light starts flickering, and Ellie immediately switches off the phonograph. She asks Steven to go to bed while noticing a mathematical formula on the phonograph. Later, she goes to watch the television. Suddenly, the television stops, and the lights in the house start to go off too. She wonders what could have gone wrong, and she calls her mother. Kiera asks her to check the circuit in the cellar for damage, but Ellie refuses to go there. Kiera persuades her, saying it's for Steven, who'd be scared in the dark. She suggests there are only 10 cellar steps, and if Ellie's scared, she should count them down together to ease her nerves. Reluctantly, Ellie makes her way to the cellar. She counts from 1, and her mother stays on the other side of the phone. She keeps counting until the 10th step, and Kiera expects her to stop. However, Ellie continues to count, which puzzles her. Realizing something is wrong, Kiera quickly rushes home. They couldn't find Ellie in the cellar, and they call the police. After multiple searches, Ellie remains missing, leading to the assumption that she fled from home. Kiera disputes this, asserting that Brian failed to hear Ellie counting and believes she is in the cellar. Worrying about Ellie's whereabouts, Kiera forgets to pick Steven up from school. She goes to pick him up and goes to the police station. Upon arrival, she learns that Ellie is being bullied in social media. She pleads with the police for a forensic search of her house, but they decline as it's not a criminal case. She returns home and sees a Maxim by the door. Curious, she browses about it. She called Steven to ask if Ellie was behaving abnormally that night, and Steven tells her about the phonograph they played. She also searches Ellie's social media account, where she finds out Ellie has a hidden tattoo. Kiera returns to the cellar to find new leads. She uses a UV light and sees the same mathematical equation on the floor and a demonic painting. That's sufficient for forensics to search the house, so the detective calls them in. But they only discover that the painting dates back to the 1950s. The officer asks about the previous owner, and Brian reveals they got the house at an auction. That night, Steven wakes Kiera up because she wet his bed. After laying him to sleep, she calls Ellie's number again to hear her voice. She sits in the bathroom and cries, but she suddenly starts hearing the voice of Ellie counting from a part of the house. She searches for her voice but finds no clue. Returning to the cellar, she accidentally nudges a ball, sending it tumbling downstairs. She is eventually led to the same mathematical equation again. The following day, she confides in Brian and he promises that everything will be fine. Curious to learn more, Kiera calls auctioneer Rob to inquire about the previous owner. However, Rob lacks specific information and only knows her as the daughter of a famous academician. She notices that there are some symbols in front of every door. She takes pictures of the symbols and returns to work. At work, she asks her colleague Erica to find out more about the symbols. Later, Erica informs her that the symbols are Hebrew, and when they are kept together, it means Leviathan, the name of a sea creature in Jewish mythology. Kiera goes to pick up Steven, who had gotten into a fight with a classmate who said Ellie was dead. She returns home and researches about Leviathan. She decides to play the phonograph. As she does that, the analog beads start moving. The voice reads out the mathematical equation. The light starts flickering, and when it starts counting from 1, Steven subconsciously starts walking toward the door. Kiera stops the voice and calls out for Steven, who has no recollection of what he has done. While thinking about a solution, Kiera checks the portrait and sees the house owner is John Featherston. She decides to research on him. Meanwhile, the lights in her house start switching off one by one. She starts hearing Steven's voice in the cellar, and she suggests to open the door. Unable to find the key, she checks the keyhole and is startled by a monster inside. Suddenly, Steven appears behind her, claiming that he is sleeping in the room. The door opens and she finds the key on the ground. She returns the key to the top of the door and enters the cellar. The light switches off again and the door shuts. She starts hearing weird sounds and her phone falls and goes missing. Panicked, she begs Steven to open the door, but he struggles with it. That is when Brian returns and helps with opening the door. She tries telling Brian about the series of weird events happening, and he remains skeptical. The following day, Kiera goes to Featherston's former university to meet a doctor, Fournette. She gives Fournette the equation and asks about Featherston. Fournette tells her Featherston left the academy world when his son got sick and eventually disappeared. But he has a daughter, Rose. Fournette suspects that the equation may lead to another dimension and promises to inform Kiera if he finds more information about it. When Kiera returns home, Fournette calls her. He tells her he had been calling her number and someone picked up, and the person was counting. He also tells her the equation is an incomplete one, and it leads to other dimensions. He also reports that an equation like that was found at a house in Belgium where the entire family went missing. Later, Kiera tells Brian about her new discovery, but he still remains doubtful. Unconvinced, she takes him to the cellar and shows him the equation. Meanwhile, the light starts flickering again, and Steven walks to a secret room. Flustered, Brian tries to destroy the equation, and Steven starts seeing a weird figure, resembling Ellie, while he screams for his parents. Steven tells them he saw a figure that looks like Ellie, and when they check the room, they find Ellie's phone. Later, Rob informs Kiera that he has found Rose at a nursing home. Kiera meets Rose, who discloses that her father summoned Leviathan, a hellish prince, to cure her sick brother. She also tells her the demon is in the entire house. At home, Brian decides to research about the symbols. He uses the triangles to form a word. He combines it with his research on Leviathan and finds out it is a demon named Baphomet. When Kiera arrives, he shows Kiera the picture of the demon, and he raises his finger the same way John Featherston did in the portrait. They realize the house is designed after the demon, and Kiera suggests that they should play the phonograph again to open the door so they can bring Ellie out. Meanwhile, Steven took his drone to the cellar. That is also when they realize something is wrong and desperately look for Steven. They eventually find him, but she sees the symbols on his chest. Steven starts acting unusually and starts counting. Panicked, she goes to find Brian in the secret room, and he starts counting too. Brian tells her Baphomet has arrived. Terrified, she quickly hides herself, but eventually meets with Baphomet. Luckily, she is able to escape before Baphomet catches her. She hides in a secret room and finds a tunnel leading to another dimension. She is eventually led to a place where several zombified people are counting and moving in the same direction. She starts breaking down, and when she sees a familiar tattoo on one of them, she realizes it's Ellie, but she doesn't respond. Kiera quickly brings her daughter out of the place, and while doing so, Baphomet chases them from the back. Fortunately, she's able to escape, and she quickly shuts the door before Baphomet catches up. Kiera gathers her family and tells them they should leave, but as she opens the door, she sees the long flight of stairs. Turns out they have not left the dimension, and the family starts counting again, this time including Kiera. In the closing scene, the house is seen in the middle of nowhere. Subscribe to watch more videos like this, leave a like to help the channel out, also leave a comment if you'd like us to recap your favorite movie. Thanks for watching.